Hey everyone, welcome to Holly's Bookmark. I'm Holly, and today I will be reviewing Italo Calvino's book, If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler. If you watched my January TBR, you will know I had a really hard time trying to describe what this book was about. I am going to have the same issue even though I've read this book. It's very hard to describe what it's about to someone else without having you read it. I don't know if that makes sense. So basically, in simple terms, it's a book about reading. Is written in the second person. Well, half the book is written in second person. So that means it's you, basically. So you are the protagonist in a way, you as the reader. You're basically called the reader. You don't have a name, from what I remember. There is a second reader named Ludmila, and you do go into her perspective, but only for like 2 seconds, and it's really hard to describe, so I'm not gonna get into that layer because it's too much and in depth, and I think it's like one of those things where it's like you have to read it to kind of understand how you get there. So you go to a bookstore to buy Italo Calvino's book, If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler. You start reading the book. This is when a chapter change happens, and in the next chapter after you start reading the book, it starts a story, like what the story that you are reading. After one chapter of the story that you are reading, so you were reading this book in a book. Does that make sense? It's kind of Inception style. The book cuts off and it keeps repeating itself over and over again. So you're pissed because you wanted to keep reading the book. So you go to the bookstore and you show the bookstore worker, you're like, hey man, this book is messed up. And they're like, yeah, there's been this big printing problem. You can go get another one and see if it works out. And if it doesn't, let us know. And so as you go to retrieve the book, there's a girl standing in one of the aisles, and you start chatting, and you both talk about how you were really disappointed that this book was messed up. And you think she's really cute, so you ask her for her number, and she gives it to you, and you kind of ask for it under the guise of, you know, just in case this book's messed up again, you know, we can be in it together. So you get another copy, that book, and you read one chapter. Again, you're reading the chapter in this book, but it's a completely different story from the first one. After one chapter, that book's messed up. So you call Ludmila, and she's like, meet me at this university. There's this professor I know that specializes in this kind of literature that we just read. And the passage you just read that's different from the first one, holy crap, I'm like getting a headache from this, is based in a fictional country. Fictional to us, not fictional in the book. It's a country that doesn't exist anymore in the book. It got like eradicated or taken over after, I think, World War II. And it's Sumerian, I think is the word. I think that's like the language is Sumerian. Samaria or something is the country, I believe. So there's a professor that's an expert in Sumerian literature. So the next day you meet with the professor, and Ludmila is there too. And he's kind of giving the history on like the author and the country that this book was based on and stuff. And he's like, oh, I have, you know, that's really the author you were reading, but it's named under it. Gosh, how do you freaking explain this? And he's like, oh, the book you were reading that was titled Outside the Town of Malbork is not what you need. You need book number 3, and that is the real book and will provide you with more information. So they read the third book, and it's a completely different story. Okay, so I think you're seeing a pattern here, right? You have narrative, fictional book chapter that you, the reader in the book, is reading. Narrative, fictional book, narrative, fictional book. That's how it goes for most of the whole story. I think there's at one point there's two chapters. No, that's how it goes. One chapter you're reading a diary of someone, but I guess that counts as like the fictional reading. But basically the outline of the story, I'm sorry if this has been confusing, honestly. Basically the outline of the story is you're basically just trying to read a book, but these chapters always end after one, and then you get interested and you kind of fall into like this weird mystery of like, why do we keep only getting one chapter of each book, and why are they all connected, and who's doing this and why? So it falls, you tumble through this mystery of why is there only one chapter, and it goes into like this translator guy that was doing like fake translations of books when he was supposed to be translating them, but he was really just making up his own stories and not really translating them. So, you know, if he's translating a book from Japanese to English, instead of just translating it, he's just writing a new book in English. This gets tangled up with this author that lives in Switzerland, and Ludmila is tangled up in it in her past. And then the main protagonist, end up going to South America to like get to the base of this like fake book, fake translation thing. And then you're kind of finding the true philosophy meaning of like what is reading and what is reading to you. And that's like the base of the book. It's obviously more in depth than that. I kind of don't want to get more in depth than that. A, because like probably what's happening to you now, it's confusing as all get out. B, it's kind of spoily, I guess, because it's like this, it's a semi-mystery of you like trying to figure things out in the narrative chapters. And I don't want to spoil that for you. It's kind of like you're taking on this adventure with fiction chapters in the middle. I do think there is probably some connection to the fictional chapters with coinciding with the narrative chapters that they're sandwiched in between. I'm not sure. It might be obvious to some people. I think it's a little more light and philosophical maybe otherwise, but I didn't really see too strong of a connection necessarily between the two. But I do have a feeling there is a connection, and I just didn't fully grasp it. Possibly. You as the reader, the actual person in flesh, not the you in this book, you feel the frustration along with you, the protagonist, because some of these books, the first chapters of these books that you constantly are reading for 10 chapters, I think it is. I think you technically start 10 books in this book. Some of them are very intriguing and you do want to read more. Some are mystery based. Some are, you know, like romantic based. One is just purely sexual. And so there's some where I was starting to get a little attached or intrigued, and then it just cuts off. And I think that was a cool idea to do, because you do feel the frustrations with the protagonist. But in the same way, it also gets a little tiring. A, because you just want to complete a book, but that's the point of this book. And B, like, you get kind of attached to the narrative aspect. So you're like, I just want to read that part now. I don't care about these chapters anymore. So for me, by the time I was getting towards the end of the book, I was like, okay, you know. But it is a really trippy idea. I did like, it was just really weird. A lot of the things were weird. There are some made up countries, made up languages, made up names. Like the professor's name, I think, is Professor Uzi Tuzi. Like, what a great name, you know? And that happens throughout the whole book. Like, a lot of people's names are just like random sounds, and you can't really tell like where people are from necessarily, because this does span across multiple different countries and around the world. So I really did like the trippy aspect of this book. So I mean, this was pretty quick review. It's hard to talk about because it's mostly spoily, and then like the Inception fictional passages within are hard to talk about, because what's the point in talking about them, honestly? So I gave it a 4 stars. I had a really good time. I think the ending does get a little wonky, and you are kind of tired of the back and forth with the fictional passages versus the narrative story bit. And then towards the very end with the philosophy, it kind of lost me. But overall, such a cool book. Would recommend it if you're into kind of trippy stuff. Okay, quick stats. This was published in 1979. General fiction literature. The setting is, I'm just gonna call it fictional or fantasy, because while real countries in our world do exist, like Switzerland and Japan, there are a lot of made-up countries, and they don't specify where you, the reader, and Ludmila are. I'm gonna guess they're in Italy, honestly, but it doesn't specifically say, and it even plays coy with that. Like it like kind of hints, and it doesn't really want to tell you. So I'm saying it's fantasy, and it's 260 pages. Thank you for joining me for my review for If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler. Please join me next time when I read Number 9 Dream by David Mitchell, which actually has some similarities with If on a Winter's Night, and we'll talk about that in the review. And I will say, if you have read Number 9 Dream by David Mitchell and you liked it, you will like this book. All right, see you guys next time.